1 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. Well, we're all excited. Julia, our last session that ended at 12:30, we had the governor of Ohio come on at about 12:28, and he spent about 7 or 8 minutes with us, which was a lot of fun. So
Right.
I don't know how we can top that, but we top that by having you. So it's my pleasure and distinct honor to introduce Julia Gordon. Julia is the president of the National Community Stabilization Trust, and that's a nonprofit organization that seeks to reclaim vacant homes, something we know a lot about in our land bank work, and also to increase home ownership in underserved markets. Again, something we talked about in our last panel from Youngstown and Warren, Ohio. In addition to managing NCST's program work, transferring REO properties, they have a very special mission to mission-focused developers. She also serves as a leader in policy in the area of mortgage, affordable housing, community development sectors on issues of equitable development and sustainable home ownership. She in the past has served as the senior director of housing consumer finance at the Center for American Progress. She managed a single family policy team at the FHA and was a senior policy counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending. She's worked in civil legal aid, litigator. She's got great credentials. She's undergraduate degree at Harvard and her JD from Harvard Law School as well. And Julia, we want to thank you for joining us. And when you're ready to have them queue up this PowerPoint, they'll do it.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. And it's an absolute delight to be here today. Jim, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I don't know if you remember that we first met during the foreclosure crisis over a decade ago, when you were coming to DC from time to time to say a few things to a few people. And, you know, watching what's happening in Ohio with land banks and with the Thriving Communities Institute, it's really inspirational, and I'm so excited to be a part of your event today. Just to try to make it a little more realistic, I did ask my teenager to go in the kitchen and clank some silverware around so that it really feels like I'm the lunch speaker at a conference. So, you know, pardon any clanking in the kitchen that you might hear. This is the
Julia, I just want you, you're freezing. I'm not sure what we can do about that, but you're freezing up on the screen.
Not that it wasn't important all along, but many of the neighborhoods we work in are facing a real crisis right now. And I'm not telling you anything new. We know how many people that we've lost to the pandemic. We know how many millions of jobs we've lost. We know how many kids are missing school, and parents are having to become, you know, teachers and workers and try to find new jobs if they were in a job that's been lost. It's a bad situation. And at times like this is when people most need a stable home and a strong community. And that's where we come in. You know, that's why the world needs us so much right now. We're not doctors, we're not epidemiologists, we're not biologists developing a vaccine. You know, we're learning how to be school teachers. I'd say if you talk to most people, they wouldn't call any of us an essential worker. But the reason I wanted to come here today is because we are essential workers. We are attending to some of the least sexy issues out there. You know, we deal with blighted properties and exciting issues like tax arrearages or property liens or land use issues. You know, if the average person ended up on this Zoom right now, they would end up pretty bored. You know, you'll hear me talk some about foreclosures, about tax policy, and of course about land banks. But what people need to know is that we are a critical part of the ecosystem of providing those strong communities, of providing those homes, and, you know, not just as an add-on, also providing the jobs and opportunities in the housing field that come along with all of those things. So in fact, all of us here today are essential to meeting the challenges that our country faces today, and that the state of Ohio faces today. And, you know, I want to start my talk by just saying to you, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for showing up at work, whether it's actually at an office or just at your kitchen table like I am right now. I see what you do, and I value it, and I want you to know that what you do is not just tangential to today's challenges, it's really central to them. The fact is, you know, most policymakers don't spend a lot of time thinking about what happens to properties when they're abandoned or blighted. You know, even people who do real estate are very focused on the front end of the market. How many mortgages are we making? What are home prices this week? You know, how can we produce more affordable housing? There are enormous industries devoted to this. You know, the expression, you know, how many commas you got? Real estate has a lot of commas, you know, this is trillions and trillions of dollars. But the fact is, often very few people think about how much it matters what happens to properties on the other end. You know, what happens when code enforcement doesn't happen and a property becomes blighted? What happens when a property is abandoned? The fact is that disposition methods and the timing of disposition and the pricing, all of that is going to make a difference for, you know, do you support continued or renewed occupancy? Do you support homeownership? Do you support neighborhoods that look nice and are healthy and safe? These things are all critical for stabilizing neighborhoods. And so, you know, responsible disposition practices really matter to the whole cycle of life in real estate. We also know that, you know, there are certain kinds of things we do that can lead to more vacancy and abandonment. You know, investors who don't take care of their properties or who don't have a stake in the community where they're purchasing real estate, which is something that, you know, is a much bigger problem today than it was a couple of decades ago. Municipalities that don't pay attention to neighborhoods unless the neighborhoods are either gentrifying or unless there's, you know, some really kind of terrible thing happening. All of these things are important, but don't always get the headlines. And so I wanted to be here because we all know this, and we get to talk together about these things and about how we can do these things better. So before I go into more details about some of the policy and programmatic issues I want to talk to you about today, please indulge me while I talk about my own organization, the National Community Stabilization Trust. Some of you know us as NCST, which is what I call us. Some of you know us as the Trust. We were founded in 2008 in the wake of the last housing crisis. And we were created by folks who both had lots of REO properties, namely lenders, and people in the community who, particularly at that time, had subsidy through the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, NSP, to acquire and rehab single-family properties. So we were created as something of a bridge between those lenders and those community developers. Since our founding, we've actually facilitated the transfer of over 27,000 properties in communities all across the United States. More than 1,500 of those properties were in Ohio. And these properties were all put back to productive use, the majority for homeownership, others for affordable rental. And in all of them, we kept fairly meticulous track of what kind of rehab was being done and what the, what the end outcome of that work was, giving us really one of the most extensive databases in the country that has to do specifically with single family rehab. Now would be a good time for slides. We can move on to the next slide if someone else can do this for me. You can go past that. That's just more about us, more about us. Next one after that. So I always like to show before and after pictures because, it's what we do and it gets me excited and it's fun. And in particular, I was able to find some fun before and after pictures from some of our Ohio Land Bank partners. So I'm going to flip through them, or you're going to flip through them real quick, just so you can see the kind of difference our partners are able to make. It's just a few slides and you can kind of go through them while I keep talking. So in addition to working as this real estate platform, or sometimes I call us Zillow for crappy homes, but I know that that's not nice to say. We have also begun in recent years to develop some deep expertise in policy work. What we are trying to do is be a voice for distressed properties and the folks who work with those properties in the policy discussions that happen in Washington or in states and cities across the country. We want to get this issue a seat at the table, and that's what we try to do. And so, we advocate for, we are often the only commenter when a government agency makes a change to a policy that affects disposition related issues, because to be honest, really nobody else is paying that much attention day to day in Washington on some of these issues. We also work on issues that get more attention. We work on policies related to access to mortgage credit, foreclosure prevention, community development issues, but we really try to be there when it comes to things that are going to affect what's happening in communities. I'll give you one example of that. A couple of years ago, when FHFA was looking at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac policies regarding charge-offs of homes in communities where, they would essentially say, okay, we're done here. We were the organization, the external organization at the table to make sure that what they did in changing those, again, very under the radar policies was not going to inadvertently hurt communities. So I want to mention a couple of our new policy initiatives because I think they'll be interesting to people here and you haven't heard about them before. One project is the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative. We are bringing together local policymakers, city planners, and other city officials, community development practitioners, researchers, and anyone who works in the neighborhoods that we call them middle neighborhoods. And I think everyone here has a sense of what we mean. We're not talking about the places that are gentrifying like crazy and have issues related to that, nor are we talking about the neighborhoods that have been deeply, deeply distressed for decades, where, there's another suite of policies in that area. But we're looking at those neighborhoods in the middle. These are neighborhoods where you have some home ownership, where you have some commercial activity. Many of these neighborhoods have historically been Black neighborhoods or, neighborhoods of other demographic groups. And these neighborhoods tend to just kind of teeter on the edge between being good, solid, growing economies or potentially tipping into more of a decline situation. And these neighborhoods don't always get the attention others get from governments or budgets because, it's kind of not maybe that broken. But we know that in these neighborhoods, this is where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We need to keep these neighborhoods strong. So we're looking at what are the policies that really matter for that. How do we keep these this is especially important during COVID, which is hitting a lot of these neighborhoods very, very hard. And that's going to, reduce tax bases. And, once again, we'll see those costs go up for public health and safety. And we want to make sure neighborhoods don't end up in a situation that's much more difficult to reverse. So that's one initiative we're working on, where we have a large and completely open to everybody community of practice that is being managed by NeighborWorks America. And anybody who's interested in this, contact me afterward and I'll tell you how to become part of that. This year, NCST also launched a new initiative, a new coalition called the Homeownership Alliance. And the Homeownership Alliance is a practitioner-led initiative, and the founding members include some of the leading nonprofit homeownership developers and lenders around the country. Here in Ohio, for example, CHN Housing Partners, which does such amazing work in this area, is one of the founding members of this coalition. So that's also something you can find out more about on our website. So enough about NCST. I want to talk about some policy things here today. So something a lot of you may be wondering about is, how is the pandemic and the pandemic economy impacting the housing markets? And what's that going to mean for neighborhood stabilization over the next few years? Go to the next slide. One back there you go. So what this slide shows you is delinquency levels. That scary line at the end is just like every other scary line on every other chart when you're looking at the economy over the past 6 months. Now, I'll tell you one thing that makes that spike a tiny bit less scary, which is when you hear about mortgage delinquencies, that includes forbearances. Forbearances are formally counted as delinquencies. So we don't know that all of these people either are not paying their mortgage or won't be able to pay their mortgage. All we know is right now they felt like they needed help from their mortgage servicer. So what happens next after this? Next slide. What does this mean for REO inventory? Well, right now we have foreclosure moratoria that apply to all of the federally backed mortgages, which is about 70% of the market. And a lot of lenders have also imposed their own moratoria. So, let's say somewhere between 80 to 90% of the market is in a moratorium right now. That means we're developing this enormous, what we used to call in the last crisis, shadow inventory. Homes that could turn into foreclosures. Next slide. You can see here the REO inventory. Because we have these moratoria, we're not getting new REO because everything is in that pre-foreclosure stage. If, at some point these moratoria will end, and these forbearances will end, and what we see happen to our housing markets, to our neighborhoods, to our city budgets, is going to depend on how we manage that situation. is at the end of the mortgage. There are fantastic loan modification options from all of the federally backed channels. But will we be able to get people into those? You know, we just don't know this yet. And once these Can anybody hear me? Am I frozen?
Julia, you have been freezing on and off, just so you know.
I have been. Well, I can, I will try to move a bit and see if this helps. Is that better? I'm going to move a lot.
Yeah, Julia, you're frozen again.
All right, folks, is that better? I've moved. That's going to have to do. So next slide, please. So these are the projections that we have from some analysts that we've been working with who do not see the REO inventory really peaking again until 2024. I'll tell you, I think they're kind of wrong. I mean, I partly put this slide up there to tell you I think they're wrong. I see you all frozen again. I'm really paranoid. Oh, I'm good. Okay. So I actually think these numbers don't take into account non-judicial states and don't take a variety of things into account regarding, you know, how servicers are preparing. I think to the extent we see this new, you know, slug of foreclosures come through, it's going to start hitting the market by 2022 or at the latest 2023. Hopefully the total numbers will be smaller, considerably smaller than 2008. We have a lot of time to prepare. We have infrastructure in place and laws and loss mitigation in place that were not in place before. But we do need to be ready for handling these REO if they do come through. So, you know, I did want to talk about that some today. The last thing I want to talk about before I run out of time here today is the role of land banks in rebuilding communities. You know, NCST has worked with land banks since we were founded. We've helped land banks acquire REO assets, and we've also worked with land banks in identifying properties that are candidates for demolition. And it's really impressive to see how many land banks have become real experts at preventing blight, both through acquisition and through, you know, other neighborhood interventions. You know, it's been great to see the number of land banks grow and to see the creativity in the diversity of structures that you all have, you know, whether it's partnering with community-based organizations. You know, I've heard about the Trumbull Neighborhood Partnership and the Cincinnati Port. And I know, you know, lots of you work really closely with local county government. But as you start thinking about the future, I want to talk about 3 lessons that NCST has learned when it comes to thinking strategically in this area. And the first one of those lessons is how important it is about being intentional about property disposition. You know, when land banks were created, or when most land banks were created, our biggest concern was the stuff that was coming in as opposed to stuff that was going out. But we are in an inventory shortage now. There is interest in properties. And so how can we take a critical look at who's purchasing these properties and what they're doing with it? You know, at NCST, we carefully monitor our community developers' activities and what they're going to do with properties. Is it going to be home ownership? If it's going to be rental, you know, is it going to be affordable rental? We really want to know what's going to happen, not just how much money can we get for this property, because then there would be no point to us doing what we do. So, you know, we love when we see land banks coordinate with city planners and community-based partners, whether it's to, you know, do parcel assembly for strategic development, or, you know, to move away from demo and to be more development focused. We're really excited about that. And we want to encourage you to continue to be really strategic about how those properties leave, as you were in terms of how those properties came in. We also want to stress the importance of tracking and maintaining data on property and you know, property disposition and end use. We require all of our community developers to provide not just reporting on what ultimately happens to the property, but we get their scopes of work. We see how much, you know, money was put into the rehab, et cetera, et cetera. And having this data helps organizations make the case for the impact of what you do. And the last point I want to make here is maybe a little more delicate, but I want to remind everyone about the importance of reputation. Real estate is kind of famous for opportunities for conflict of interest. And so for even good actors like NCST, we have, you know, had our own issues in this area, and for land banks, you really want to make sure you have the appropriate policies and controls in place so that, you know, both in practice and also in appearance, land banks are being careful stewards of the trust that the public has placed in them. So, you know, NCST stands ready to continue to partner with land banks to try to do this and do it better. And, you know, in particular, we're looking into whether it makes sense for land banks not only to be buyers through NCST, but maybe also to become sellers through NCST and potentially bring a third-party vendor into that space to help with the intentionality of that disposition, the tracking, you know, and making sure that there are no conflicts. So I'm going to close in a minute because my time is coming up, but I wanted to talk about one more policy thing that I think is really important for us to think about now as opposed to later. And that's like this little glimmer of hope on a bill we've been working on for 2 years now called the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which I abbreviate as NEIA, which is not that mellifluous, but whatever, it's all I've got. What NEIA would do is create a new federal tax credit to support construction, renovation, or repair of 1 to 4 unit properties intended for home ownership, or already occupied by a homeowner. And this is aimed at neighborhoods with lower incomes and weaker housing markets. And the purpose of the tax credit is to fill what some of you call the value gap or the appraisal gap, which is when the cost of acquiring and rehabbing or constructing a home is greater than the fair market value of that home. And I know I don't have to explain that problem to this group here today. If we're able to create this new program, if this bill passes, it's going to be a game changer for neighborhoods struggling with vacancy, outdated housing stock, or even just a shortage of affordable homeownership properties. And what I'm here to tell you is start thinking about this now before the bill passes. I think there's a decent chance we create this program. We have seen a remarkable level of interest from a very broad range of stakeholders. It's been introduced in both the House and Senate by bipartisan co-sponsors, not the least of which is your own Senator Portman and my own Senator Cardin. It's supported by virtually every corner of the housing industry, from nonprofits and Habitat for Humanity and LISC to the mortgage bankers and the realtors and the housing finance agencies. It's in Vice President Biden's presidential platform. This thing could happen. And if it happens, I want you to be ready to be at the table. You know, what role do land banks have in helping guide how this tax credit would be used? What role do you have in assembling the properties that would be used? How can you partner with OFA, which has already been such a key partner in your neighborhood stabilization efforts, to use this program effectively? So I just wanted to put that on the table for folks to think about. And I will just close by thanking you again for letting me be here today, and wishing you all, you know, continued success in your efforts, continued health so that you can have success in your efforts. And NCST is here to partner, to help in any way any of us can think of. So thank you so much, and back to you, Jim.
Julia, and thank you so much. And prior to COVID, land banks used to meet quarterly somewhere in the state. And I think this would be an ideal topic for one of those quarterly meetings, although it's likely to be a virtual meeting. But I think this topic is a good one. And I think it's one that could be one of the focuses of our next land bank meeting. So thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for all that you do. And this is where I get to tell people, the 100 and next number of people who are listening, that we're going to take about a 7-minute break because I need to get some water. And again, thanks so much.